Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. Today is a guest that may be a distant cousin of mine. The jury's still out on that one, and you'll see why I think that in just a minute. Gentleman that went to Babson College with. He was in the grad program. I was in the undergrad program. We got to know each other really well there. Always struck me as an incredibly intelligent individual. Several years later, he turned around and he started this company that helps other companies get the most of their social media efforts. And then as I was speaking out in California, he happened to be a guest in the audience there. We reconnected, got to learn a lot more about what he was doing, and I felt compelled to bring him to you, our awesome audience, so we could learn more about how we can maximize our social media. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Glenn Gaudet,
Yay!
CEO of Gaggle Amp. What's up, my cousin from, many legs away, I suppose.
Brother from another mother, as you might say. So, wow, you've come a long way. Congratulations. Awesome job.
Yeah,
Um,
well, I managed to take my life a little bit more seriously since
yeah,
college, and
I think it happens to some of us. We get caught up in the fun. I think what's really interesting about the world is how things have changed. I mean, even when you had graduated, and certainly when I graduated, there wasn't really this thing called social media, was there?
no, in fact, I still remember in a debate with a guy, Bill Bygrave. I don't know if you
Oh,
remember Bill
yeah.
Bygrave.
Yeah.
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 I remember sitting in class debating with him whether or not people would trust the internet enough to put their credit card down and buy things over the internet. I
What
mean,
side were you on? What side were you debating?
I could see things both ways because on one hand, I'm like, well, you do give the waiter or the waitress your credit card, who then takes it in another room to process it, and then it comes back. So you're still sharing your credit card with other
Mm.
people, but at the same time, the internet was so foreign. I mean, it was so foreign back in the day that I took off to Australia for 6 months. And that whole 6 months, I never checked my email because I didn't realize I could check my email from another country on another computer. I mean, that's how new everything
Yeah.
was, right?
Yeah.
But now you and I are faced with another interruption, which is now artificial intelligence and AI.
There is some disruption that is not just starting to take place, but I think is really going to take hold. I don't think AI is a fad. I think it's here to stay. And I think that there's lots of promise. There's also lots of potential danger for companies in terms of how they're doing business. And they really need to rethink what they can do and how they can leverage AI. I think there's going to be a tendency for certain people to say, oh, I'll just have AI be my marketing department. They'll create all my content. And I think that's
Yeah,
dangerous. I think that's dangerous when you
I
outsource
agree.
content, even to a super smart computer, you're still outsourcing the content. And I think that there's some danger that exists when you do that because you get that much further from the marketplace.
I'm certain that there has to be some of your clients that are using AI based content and others of them that are focused much more on genuine authenticity. Have you run on any studies yet as far as how AI has impacted social media at this point, or is it still a little bit too new, so to speak?
So I think it's really new for massive adoption. So we have a SaaS platform that allows companies to get their employees to be part of their digital marketing effort. So
Mhm.
broadly speaking, it's called employee advocacy, where your employees now become an advocate for the company. And so what our platform does, it makes it super easy and fun to actually get engaged with all sorts of digital engagements, content sharing, really whatever you need done from an alignment point of view. If you were going to align all of these tens, hundreds, thousands of employees to be doing certain activities. And so what we're seeing right now is what's moving the needle isn't just the content aspect, which is, I think, where AI would come in, but it's also on the engagement side. So that's really where there's this symbiotic effect of getting your employees to be part of your digital marketing efforts because now they're having direct impact on the algorithms themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. And how the algorithm's really going to prioritize one person's content over another person's content. And so leaning in
It's not the
on,
content,
yeah, it's
it's
really
the
not, you
engagement.
have to create like a really great piece of content, but the only thing that the algorithms are going to be able to go on as to whether or not your content is great or
It's the
not
engagement.
great
Yeah, right.
is just engagement. You
Yeah,
just can't buy likes because that's not engagement. Engagement is that authentic comment and back and forth and all that other jazz. And the only way that we're going to be able to control the bots and build more authenticity into the marketplace is to actually charge you that $8,
right.
which is really nominal, but just to be able to say there's a real human behind this. What you're doing is great because it's helping to cut through a lot of that noise. Now, of
Hmm.
course, great content brings great engagement, and the companies that are working for you, they just can't put out crap.
Correct.
But I think there are several companies that I feel may have to work a little bit harder to compete in the world of AI. I think your company, from what I see at a distance, I can make a really strong, compelling argument why Gaggle Amp is positioned to this new wave of AI,
Mm,
almost like it could be Christmas morning for you. I
that's
really
right.
do think it could be a massive, massive opportunity.
The way I describe it to a lot of companies to help them understand it is that content is the ante to the game, but it's not how you win the game. You
Mhm.
can have the greatest content in the world, but there's a tendency to take that content and put it on the corporate assets. And so when you do that, it kind of falls on deaf ears because people at the end of the day are interacting with other people. And so what you want to do is you want to get that content to be part of a discussion that's taking place out there. Have you heard the term dark social?
Yes.
Okay, so dark social is a fascinating area as well because what it does is it really talks about all of those digital conversations that are taking place outside the purview of the company, right? And
Right.
so it's all those conversations that are taking place before they even come to visit your website.
The
And so
untrackable conversations.
the untrackable conversations, right? So now, how do you actually have any kind of an impact in that? Well, the best way to have impact in that is to have as many people as you can and as many conversations out there so that you can put all these little breadcrumbs all over the place that leave the impression that you not only have some influence out there, but you also have a way for them to come and get even more information by coming to you formally now and maybe getting some information from your website or interacting with an employee who's now viewed as an influencer out there who can actually help you in your
Yeah.
decision process.
So let's take a look at the challenges that companies are going to have to look at in the future. So companies in the future are going to have to figure out the impact of AI currently in the way that business is done. And right now, there are companies that are SEO optimized. So somebody goes on a website and they look for best whatever, and different content comes down. Well, now with Bing that has come out with their AI based search
Mhm.
engine, and Google will be coming out with that and so forth. If you have access to it and you start going through the search process, you realize, wow, this is completely different because
Mhm.
you're not going to get the same search results that you would have had before. And then Chat GPT has already started taking a significant percentage out of general search results. People looking for a solution, they're going to Chat GPT. And so the way that we buy is going to be different. Even Chat GPT, for that matter, has these plugins that go out that are going to find the best restaurant, that are going to find the best vendors, that are going to find the best of everything. And so when we look at creating an advantage now in this upcoming new world, it's about being able to create a brand that's so strong that people look for you by name, which
Mm.
is going to help increase your odds of being found and people doing business with you. You have to be a little more creative with how you're going to get those impressions. And that's one of the massive opportunities that I see with GaggleAmp right now is you're giving your clients the opportunity to get those more impressions by starting a broader conversation through social media.
Correct. So the more people in your company that are empowered to have some of these conversations, the more reach you're going to have. So wherever those conversations may be taking place, the chances are your marketing department can't be everywhere all at once.
Right.
To really get leverage, now you have to take it to the employees, but the employees don't always know where to go, what to do. And so that's where you want to give them some of these goals and guardrails that allow them to be part of some of these conversations. And beyond just being part of the conversations, but what tools do they have at their disposal? What pieces of content they might be sharing or interacting with that are really having that impact in those conversations that are out there that then make them look like an influencer, right? Because now
Sure.
there's somebody who's bringing value to a conversation, whereas before it was silence.
Now, how has AI played a role right now in your strategy for 2023, and maybe even if you've already looked at 2024?
Yeah. So from our point of view, there's a two-pronged approach, right? We're looking at it internally as well as externally. Internally is what use cases can we do? And so we have a number of people in the company that are actually part of what they're doing today is they're playing with AI. How can I do my job better? And then they're documenting that so that we can actually pull together as a company and say, oh, that's really interesting. How do we take some of this workload off you that might have been more busy work that the AI can do that frees you up to do more value add work, right? So that's the internal aspect. The external aspect is more like, how do we leverage it in the product? How do we leverage it to do maybe different types of messages that are being generated? So marketing might put a root message in, and then maybe there's variations that can take place from that. So there's lots of things that we can do on the product side, but I think what a lot of people are forgetting about is the internal side. Is how is AI going to change the way that your business works, that my business works, that anybody's business works? And it's not about replacing people, it's about augmenting people.
I agree. So AI as it exists today is the difference between somebody manually hammering a nail into a home versus using a nail gun. Nails that go on the roof will be done automatically for you as long as you give that instruction.
Right.
Now, the difference, though, is the instruction. People who are saying they're going to compete against AI, well, they're going to lose. It's at this point, you can't compete against AI. But if you ask, how can I work with AI? There's always going to be critical thinking, creativity that is going to stand a little more ahead of AI, because AI, by its own account, fails or is not adequate enough to replace critical thinking and creative thinking. It's the two things to AI's own accord that it can't replace. It still takes somebody to be able to guide things. There's a reason why planes aren't flying without the pilot or the co-pilot right now. You know, even though the plane has a technology to some extent to move, there still needs
Autopilot,
somebody
right.
there.
This reminds me of a business mentor that I had that essentially taught me that the power is not usually in the answer, it's in asking the right question. And it's the same thing with AI. The nuance of a question can give you greatly different results. And so, really understanding what the right questions are is so important, even more important now. Because if you go into like a chat GPT, to your point, you can change one or two words in a question and get radically different results. It's fascinating to see this, but at the end of the day, computer programs, like anything else, are very literal, and
Yes.
human beings tend to be nuanced because you might ask a question a little differently than I might ask the question, but in our brains, we might be thinking about trying to get to the same place, but we're taking two different paths to get there. How does AI then actually work in that scenario? Well, it's going to be very literal about the words that are being chosen and which position that they're being chosen in, right? There's some really interesting things that I think are going to happen. And is there some sort of normalization effect that's going to almost bucket the questions, right? Because right now, I think the key is the question. And I think
Yeah.
one of the things that most business leaders and just everyday employees as well need to focus on asking better questions. Because oftentimes, and you know this as just one of the premier business coaches out there, is that people often get stuck because they start with the answer and they
Yeah.
don't focus enough on really getting the crisp question to ask and then ponder, right? It's almost like,
Completely.
the problem looking for the solution.
You and I both know that opportunities are often masked as problems. By getting rid of the problem, what you're doing is you're inadvertently throwing away the opportunity.
Correct.
Instead of, to your point, asking a different question like, how is this the best thing in the world that could happen to me right now and in this moment?
Yep.
And then when you start looking at that differently and you start, well, how could this be the best thing? And maybe you sit down with your team and you workshop it. How could this be the best thing that could happen to us right now? You begin to all of a sudden come up with solutions that you wouldn't have thought of prior to the problem. And so many breakthroughs are happening just by changing the question.
That's right.
So now we look at Gaudet. G2 labeled you as a leader, and you've won a number of these different awards and whatnot. That didn't happen just by accident. So talk to me about how you went ahead and you created this successful company. You continue to remain on the growth tracks. What's your secret sauce?
When I started the company, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so part of it was I just didn't know that I couldn't do it. So I just kept going. And, along the way, you learn. You learn what to do, you learn what not to do. And in fact, sometimes failure is a better teacher than success, right? So if I boil it all down, one of the things that I like to think of is where I made the biggest mistake in the beginning is I, as the founder and the CEO, tried to do too much. What I learned is the only way that we grow is by getting great people and then providing just the goals and the guardrails for the organization and really helping my people thrive in that. My initial vision has actually been pretty dead on with where the industry ultimately went. Remember, when I started the company almost 14 years ago now, social media wasn't what it was today, but I had this vision of where things were going and what we could do with it and how we could leverage it from a marketing perspective within companies. Because my background was as a chief marketing officer. And so I was already thinking in that direction. But at the end of the day, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that there is this yin and the yang of product. Certainly, you want to be close to your customer. You want to find out what problems they're having so that you can help solve them, what things is going to give them value add. But if you are solely viewed on what just the customer wants, you're going to run into a dead end eventually. So you have to bring in your own set of visionary ideals in terms of, okay, the customers may not be asking for this, but we really think this is where it's going to go. So let's start also adding that in as well. So it's this constant yin and yang, this push-pull of what are customers asking for versus what is your vision actually stating. Sometimes they're not the same. And so you have to make some really interesting decisions to say, I know the customers aren't saying that they want this, but this is where I believe the industry and the market is actually going to end up. But also from the product perspective, there's always that little bit of friction that's in there. And I think that that's the really exciting thing about running a business is there is that friction and you've got to step into that and be able to help guide that product and visionary direction in a way that is going to make sure that everybody's employed the following year.
Right. I just love that you said that, Glenn. It reminds me of a quote by Henry Ford. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said, more black
Yeah.
cars or a faster
Yeah.
horse or something along those
Yeah.
lines. So Steve Jobs, he couldn't have come up with the iPhone by asking people what they wanted. But there is the importance of anticipating your customers' needs and your clients' needs.
Hmm.
But the only way you're going to anticipate their needs is by knowing them so well that you understand their pains, their desires, their ambitions, their wants, and so forth. And that's where I feel you've done a really good job by understanding your client so much and understanding the industry that allows you to anticipate. But you don't just sit there and say, I would like something. And so I'm going to go ahead and build it because it's something that I would like, or I think this is cool. So my clients will think this is cool and whatnot. There is a way to be able to put real data behind something before you go ahead and you go all in.
Mm. And a lot of times what you want to do is you want to be able to validate too. So you've got this idea of where this is going to go, and you can kind of create some mock-ups, bring it to some customers and say, hey, I know you weren't thinking about this, but what about this? And would this solve this particular problem, or would this add value in a way that's meaningful to you? And so having those kinds of conversations, I think, is really important because it kind of bridges that gap. It
Yeah.
allows you to get some validation from your customers. But also, you have to remember too, is that in most situations, people are thinking about solutions that they're already familiar with. They're not necessarily thinking about, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had this brand new conceptual idea and brought that in? That's your job, right? As a potential vendor to them, that you're coming up with some of those new ideas and then you're bringing it to them and socializing it with them so that you can actually get buy-in. And usually along the way, you're going to get whatever your original idea was will get tweaked along the way because you've had some meaningful conversations with people that would potentially be buying or adding that particular feature set.
Peter Drucker said, marketing and innovation produces results. Everything else is an expense. And, you know, between your CMO background on the marketing side and clearly the innovation side, especially in SaaS, if you're not innovating in SaaS, then you're very quickly becoming
Yeah.
a dinosaur. So, Glenn, I realize we're pushing up against the clock here. This is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would you say is your number one best piece of advice for our 7, 8 figure CEOs that are listening to today's podcast, asking themselves, how do I get beyond 7 figures?
I think the big challenge that you have is when you get to that seven-figure point, you're like, oh, so I did X, Y, and Z to get me to seven figures. X, Y, and Z very rarely is going to get you to the next level. And
Yeah.
so what I would do is look at who you are, how you're managing, how you're hiring, all the different aspects of you of what got you to where you are, and be prepared that none of that may work to get you to that next level. And so you
Mm,
almost have to recraft who you are as a leader, or if you're the business owner, maybe you say it's time for somebody else. But very rarely, the person that gets you from like zero to a few million is also going to be the same mindset that'll get you from a few million to 10 million, and then from 10 million to 100 million. It's a completely different way of thinking about the business. And so you cannot be trapped in, this is how I've always done it. And so I just will keep replicating that and, expect that you're going to take it to that next level.
I think that is very, very sound advice. And where I see that more commonly is when you are getting to 7 figures, a primary strategy is hard work, word of mouth, and referrals. And a lot of times they're hiring team members they can afford, not necessarily A-player team members. And most of the team is going to be outsourced.
Yeah.
But that team isn't enough to get you to that 8 figure mark, which
Right.
now you have to think in terms of scalable marketing and sales strategies.
Mhm.
Now you have to think in terms of going from who you can afford to getting those A players. And very quickly you begin to learn the lesson that, wow, just one person, one A player replaces maybe 4 C players. So it's pretty remarkable.
Now
Glenn,
layer in AI.
right. Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Game changer. Glenn, people want to learn more about and connect with you and so forth. Gaggleamp, where do we take them?
So you can go to gaggleamp.com, gaggleamp.com to learn more about the company. If you want to contact me, probably one of the best ways is connect with me on LinkedIn and just make sure that you let me know that you heard me on this podcast so I don't think you're just trying to sell me something.
Awesome. So you can find Glenn, look him up, Glenn Gaudet, spelled the same way as my last name, Gaudet. You can also find him on Twitter at Glenn, Glenng, and that is gaggleamp.com. Check him out there. So that wraps up this episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. As a reminder, for more strategies and techniques for taking your company beyond 7 figures, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gaudet with my friend, possibly cousin, Glenn Gaudet. I will see you in another episode.